Hey friends, my name is SPAZ and I'm a CD junkie. On this episode of CD Junkie, I'm going to discuss one of England's finest rock and roll bands. No, not the Stones or the Beatles or the Kinks or the Who or Pink Floyd or Black Sabbath or anybody like that. I am going to discuss Status Quo. Status Quo, just great heads down boogie denim wearing rock and roll monsters, at least throughout the 70s. They did change over time, thank goodness, for us music fans who love a band to mature and change, but it wasn't so good for the band's longtime fans. But let's get to that a little bit later. I'm going to try to go through these as quick as possible. I did a version of this video that lasted 29 minutes, so I'm going to just go through the albums as fast as I possibly can. Now, in my haste of putting everything together, I've got stacks of CDs everywhere. These closets back here are filled with boxes of CDs. I got CDs all around me, and I could not seem to find the band's first four albums. 1968's Picturesque Matchstickable Messages from the Status Quo, 1969's Spare Parts, 1970's Ma Kelly's Greasy Spoon, and 1971's Dog of Two Head. Now, the first two albums I mentioned are very psych rock. They're nothing like what the band became. But by the time they did Ma Kelly's Greasy Spoon and Dog of Two Head, they became that heads down boogie rock and roll band. And they really came into their own in 1972. But before I go in that direction, this is the only CD I have out in my clutches right now that represents that period from 1968 to 1971. This is a collection of all the singles they released, and you can see how the band changed throughout the years if you happen to get this. So let's dive into what I got here in front of me. 1972's PILEDRIVER. This is the album with Butterfly. This is the deluxe edition. Features all that bonus material on top of the regular album. That was an album that actually did make a mark in the US, as did Hello from 1973. This is the album with Caroline on it, one of their signature tunes. They opened plenty of concerts with the song Caroline, and that's from 1973. 1974 gave us the QUO album. This is the deluxe edition again. On the Level, 1975. Boy, this is just a great record from start to finish. This is still them in their wonderful heads down denim rock and roll days. And boy, they couldn't get more denim than that, could they? Boy, they challenged you on the next album. Blue for You, 1976. Boy, that is denim in all its glory. Another fine album, deluxe edition here with bonus tracks. Things started to change a little bit when Pip Williams started producing. This is the Rockin' All Over the World album from 1977. Actually, Rockin' All Over the World is another signature song, actually written by John Fogerty, but they really gave it new life. If You Can't Stand the Heat, 1978. This is the deluxe edition. And then things really got more poppy. They were still that great boogie denim rock and roll band, but a lot more melodies started slipping into their sound, and they started experimenting with different, more melodic styles of music. Whatever You Want from 1979. Just Supposin', another great pop rock and roll album with bonus material. That came out in 1980. Now, by this time, the original quartet of Francis Rossi and Rick Parfitt on guitar and vocals, Alan Lancaster on bass and vocals, and drummer John Coughlin came to a natural end, I guess you could say. Coughlin left the band and was replaced during this final period of the band's career. This album here is Never Too Late from 1981. More great pop goodness. And I believe towards the end also, Alan Lancaster felt the band was getting away from their rock and roll roots. This is 1982. Can you guess which year this album came out? This is an expanded edition. Back to back in 1983. The 80s were not kind to Status Quo because all the new wave bands came in and they were still releasing hits. You know, songs like Margarita Time and stuff became hits. But people weren't looking at them as that rock and roll institution anymore. And after this album, the band split. And of course, then they reunited in July of 1985 to play the opening songs for Live Aid in the UK. So Status Quo went out and they started the set with Rockin' All Over the World, the perfect opener for Live Aid. And that caused a big resurgence in the band's popularity. So Rick Parfitt and Francis Rossi decided that they're going to put a new version of Status Quo together. And Alan Lancaster was not invited to that. So Rick and Francis brought in bassist John Rhino Edwards and keyboardist Andy Bound, who'd actually been playing with them for a while anyway, and made them the new version of Status Quo. They had a succession of drummers over the years, but those four remained until the very end. In 1986, this is a very 80s album. It has the standard wonderful rock and roll sound, but it's also got keyboards and was very pop-oriented. Some, the original hardcore fans from the original quartet weren't too happy with it, but I sure was, because I'm a pop guy. I love melodies, I love hooks, and this period of the band, they just got catchier and catchier songs. This came out in 1988. This is an album called Ain't Complainin', and again, the expanded edition with bonus tracks. Now in America, they saw how popular Status Quo was, so they threw together this album, self-titled, which is actually most of the Ain't Complainin' album, with a few re-recorded tracks like Rockin' All Over the World, and they threw in a couple tracks from the In the Army Now album as well. Now, a lot of UK fans would probably think that cover looks pretty familiar, because in 1989 they released the Perfect Remedy album, and those covers look pretty alike if you ask me. But Perfect Remedy was another fine pop album. I know that the band and the fans really don't care for it, but it does have some really good songs on it and is a worthy addition to your collection. This is the expanded edition. Rock Till You Drop came out in 1991. Again, fine collection of rock and roll tunes. They actually re-recorded Can't Give You More, which was, I think, on Rockin' All Over the World. This is a great melodic album. I'm gonna say it again. I'm into hooks, and in this period of Status Quo, the band had a whole lot of hooks. Thirsty Work came out in 1989. Another fine collection of songs, moving away from that old rock and roll sound and embracing something new for Status Quo. Very commercial. I don't believe this album did that well, but a lot of the songs are just fantastic. Now, in 1996, the band was celebrating their 30th anniversary of forming, and they released Don't Stop, which was a covers album. But it's not just your standard covers album. The band does do some songs you'd expect them to do, but they also do strange things like Don't Stop by Fleetwood Mac. They do The Safety Dance by Men Without Hats, and they do Raining in My Heart, Buddy Holly. There's Fun, 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 which actually features the Beach Boys on vocals. And it's a nice collection. When You Walk in the Room on this collection is probably my favorite version of that song. Then in 1999 comes out Under the Influence, another great collection of songs. Songs, hooks, melodies with some great rock and roll. Little White Lies is probably one of my favorite Status Quo songs. So if you want to know what they sounded like in 1999, do a search for Little White Lies or give a listen to Under the Influence. Highly recommended. Now, of course, the Don't Stop album was super popular. Under the Influence did okay, and the label kept saying, come back in the studio and we'll pay you to do another covers album. And the band didn't want to do a covers album, but they promised, okay, this is it. We're not going to do any more covers album after this one. And Famous in the Last Century is a covers album for the most part. There is an original song, which is the title track. And this does have more standard stuff you'd expect, but they do a version of Way Down, the late period Elvis song. And there's a lot of, cool covers on there. It's more standard what you'd expect Status Quo to record in terms of very rock and roll. Then they rebounded with an album in 2002 that did humongously well, enormously well. They had a hit single with Jam Side Down. This is the melodic side of Status Quo with a beefier rock and roll. So it was sort of a nice blend of their old chug rock and roll and their pure melodic sense, and that's a great record. Then the label says, oh, well, that's all well and good, but we need you to go back in and record another covers album. So they promised that this would be the last covers album, and thankfully they did not lie. But this is a fun thing. It has some weird things like Pump It Up by Elvis Costello. This version here has Don't Bring Me Down, the ELO song. They also cover some of their songs, and then it comes with a DVD as well. At least this limited edition one does. 2005 brought us The Party Ain't Over Yet, another fine collection of tunes mixing their more melodic side with the rock and roll side. It seemed Francis was more into the poppier melodies, while Rick really just wanted to stick with the rock and roll. And this is, of course, a deluxe edition with bonus material. In Search of the Fourth Chord with the next album came out in 2007, and more great originals. Let me stress that, originals, just real fun rock and roll hooks. That's Status Quo. Of course, they're getting older. They're going to change. They're not going to sound like they did on Blue for You or Hello or PILEDRIVER, and they probably don't want to. But it still took another 4 years before Quid Pro Quo came out, and this came out in 2011. This is the double disc version. More great rock and roll. A lot of great songs on that album. Then in 2013, Quo finally made a movie. They didn't make a movie back in the late 60s when they should have, or the early 70s when they should have. They waited until 2013, and the movie stinks, okay? But in a real cheesy way. You have to watch it at least once because it's really bad. I mean, look, the villain in the movie is portrayed by John Lovitz. So if that doesn't tell you that the movie's kind of going to stink, then go ahead and watch it. It's on Amazon Prime, by the way. But the soundtrack I loved. More great pop goodness. They do rearrange a few older songs to fit into this exotic island vibe. But it's just a great collection of new Status Quo songs. And, of course, there's a bonus disc on this one. Then in 2014, the band strips it all down and they go acoustic. That is the band rearranging and tackling many of their finest tracks. I will tell you that Pictures of Matchstick Men on this, I think, is better than the original version. And I know that most people are probably going to disagree with me, but I love the version on this. They do have string section. They have, it's stripped down, it's acoustic, and it's beautiful and it's wonderful. And then, of course, the label says, oh my gosh, Acoustic did so well, let's do it again. And Acoustic 2. That's a Fact came out. Now, this actually does have a couple new tracks, but it is rearrangement of a bunch of their old stuff. It's not as great as Acoustic was, because Acoustic had a lot of life to it. This one here, it seemed like they had lost a little bit of heart, that maybe they didn't want to go back in so soon to record this, that they would rather be recording something brand new. And unfortunately, that is the end of the band's story in regards to studio albums, because Rick Parfitt passed away and the band fulfilled touring commitments, and it looks like they may not be back. We're not 100% sure, but the only real compilation apart from that first one I showed you is Pictures, 40 Years of Hits. Of course, it came out about a decade ago, but when they had like 75 songs that appeared in the charts. And this collects a bunch of them. And there's like a video version of this, which is more of a documentary. And the only new song that's on this, of course, is It's Christmas Time, which is probably my favorite Christmas single released in the last 20 years or so. But that's it for my Status Quo collection. I do have other live albums and some compilations, but I decided not to share them only because there's just a whole lot out there. There's probably, I think, 357 different Status Quo compilations. I'm probably exaggerating, but that's it. I hope that maybe you check out some Status Quo, because if you want the straight ahead boogie rock and roll, maybe check out the stuff that they released from 1972, 73 up to 1980 or so. And then there's that period where they went a little pop, and then by 86 they were really a perfect blend of pop and boogie rock and roll. So if you like the more melodic stuff, you're going to want to hit 86 onwards. But until the next time, thank you all for hanging out and talking Status Quo with me. And I appreciate it. And we'll smell you later.